The galaxy went silent the moment Earth spoke, not metaphorically, not as a poetic exaggeration, recorded later in history archives. It was an actual, measurable collapse of transmission activity across 17 major interstellar networks. Fleet channels froze mid-burst. Diplomatic relays stopped decoding incoming signals. Even background quantum noise, the constant static hum of deep space communication, flattened into something unnatural, like the universe itself had paused to listen. Then the second wave hit. Earth's broadcast didn't arrive like a normal transmission. It didn't travel through relays, carriers, or mapped hyperwave lanes. It appeared simultaneously inside every active system capable of receiving information. Warships in orbit around alien worlds, mining colonies on frozen moons, command stations drifting near black holes. All of them received it at the exact same nanosecond, with no delay, no distortion, no source vector. There was no signature, no encryption key, no origin point, just a voice, calm, steady, unmistakably human. They expected us to kneel on the bridge of the Zorith dreadnought Irid Voss. Admiral Kale froze mid-command. The holographic war maps around him flickered, destabilized by something they could not interpret. Across the fleet, similar reactions unfolded in perfect chaos. Officers gripping consoles, AIs running recursive diagnostics that led nowhere, pilots staring at empty space where targeting solutions should have been. The voice continued. So we showed them what defiance sounds like. Somewhere deep inside Dominion Command architecture, security systems triggered emergency protocols. Not because of an attack, but because of impossibility. The broadcast violated every known law of interstellar communication. It had no detectable carrier wave, no energy expenditure, no spatial distortion consistent with signal propagation. And yet it was everywhere. Admiral Kale stepped closer to the forward viewport. Below the fleet-stretched Earth. Small, blue, quiet. A planet that had always been dismissed in strategic briefings as low-tier developing civilization, minimal resistance potential. A world scheduled for assimilation within standard Dominion doctrine timelines. A resource node, not a threat. And yet now, it was speaking to the entire galaxy. On every screen, every interface, every projection surface across the Armada, the same words continue to burn themselves into awareness. Not as text, not as audio, but as meaning directly injected into cognition. Humanity had not begged, had not negotiated, had not even postured. It had declared. And somewhere in the quiet between star systems, something vast began to shift. Something older civilizations had once feared enough to erase from history. Kale felt it before he understood it. A pressure behind thought itself, like reality tightening its grip, because Earth's message was not a request. It was not a warning. It was an announcement. And across the listening galaxy, every species that had come to witness humanity's supposed surrender began to realize the same terrifying truth at the same time. They had not arrived to judge Earth. They had arrived to be heard by it. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Kale of the Zorith Dominion stood motionless before the vast curvature of a world that had never once been considered dangerous. The Irid Voss was not a ship, it was a statement. A kilometer-long blade of obsidian alloy and luminous energy veins, suspended in the black between stars. Its hull absorbed starlight rather than reflecting it, making it appear less like a vessel and more like a piece of the void that had learned to move. Around it, the Dominion Armada held perfect formation, hundreds of warships arranged in mathematically precise rings, each one broadcasting dominance simply by existing. Below them, Earth turned, blue oceans, white storms, green continents stitched with glowing veins of civilization. From this height, it looked fragile, almost delicate enough to shatter under thought alone. City lights blinked on the night side like scattered embers drifting across a sleeping face. Communication satellites traced faint geometric paths through orbit, unaware they were already outclassed by everything watching them. Kale studied it without emotion. That was the Dominion way. Emotion was inefficiency. Doubt was corruption. And Earth was a formality. Target world confirmed. The tactical AI intoned, its voice calm and layered in synthetic harmony. Biological classification. Human. Technological tier. Pre-ascension. Resistance probability. Negligible. Negligible. The word echoed softly through Kale's mind as he stepped forward, boots striking polished command metal with controlled precision. Around him, officers moved in disciplined silence, their interfaces projecting invasion grids over planet below, orbital strike paths, atmospheric burn vectors, resource partition models. Everything already decided, everything already owned. And yet, something about the image refused to settle. Kale did not believe in intuition, but he had learned to recognize irregularity in data patterns, and Earth was producing something dangerously close to that sensation. "Commence psychological broadcast," he ordered. A subordinate hesitated. "Admiral, standard assimilation protocol recommends." "Commence," Kale repeated. The officer complied instantly. Far below, Earth's skies shimmered as Dominion signal towers activated in orbit, projecting their ultimatum across every frequency known to human science. The message was simple, efficient, absolute. Submit, surrender, integrate. No room for interpretation. No space for defiance. Kale watched for reaction. He expected panic clusters, government collapses, military scrambling, the predictable chaos of civilization realizing it had already lost. Instead, Earth responded with silence. Not passive silence, active silence, a stillness so complete it felt intentional, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Atmospheric communication response. Kale asked. None. The AI replied. No mass transmission detected. No global distress signals. No surrender protocols initiated. A pause. Then, almost uncertainly, no fear signatures registered. Kale turned slightly, finally allowing himself to look more closely at the planet beneath them. No fear? That was statistically impossible. Even low-tier civilizations reacted. Even animals reacted. Fear was universal. It was survival logic encoded into biology itself. Yet Earth showed none of it. Instead, something else began to emerge from the sensor feeds. A faint interference. Not from Earth's technology, but from the Dominion's own systems. "Admiral," a technician whispered, voice tightening. "We're detecting unauthorized resonance across deep comm channels. Origin unknown." Kale's eyes narrowed. "Jamming?" "No, sir." Another pause. "The signal is structured." That was when Earth stopped being a target in Kale's mind and started becoming a question no Dominion doctrine had prepared him to ask. The ultimatum arrived first, not as a diplomatic transmission, not as a negotiated warning, not even as a kind of ritualized threat civilizations exchanged before war became inevitable. It arrived as a countdown embedded into every system connected to Earth. Across orbital command decks, alien officers watched as their interfaces reshaped themselves without authorization. Tactical displays dissolved into a single shared message projected across all fleets simultaneously. Surrender window, one rotation. NON compliance. Planetary termination. No signatures. No governing authority seal. No origin vector. Just certainty. Inside the Irid Voss, the bridge lights dimmed slightly as the Dominion AI reallocated processing power to analyze the anomaly. Admiral Kale stood still, eyes locked on the floating command hologram as it updated in real time, tracking Earth's planetary rotation with surgical precision. One rotation. A planetary death sentence measured in something so ordinary it felt insulting. Around him, the fleet reacted in controlled stages. Some commanders requested clarification. Others demanded verification of source authenticity. A few, rare, disciplined few, already began preparing strike adjustments, treating the ultimatum not as intimidation, but as schedule. But Kale noticed something else. The fleet was no longer entirely synchronized. Small deviations appeared across formation data. Minute hesitations in decision cycles. Micro delays in command acknowledgement. It was as if the ultimatum itself had introduced friction into systems designed to operate without it. Trace the origin of the broadcast. Kale ordered. Impossible. The AI replied instantly. Signal exists simultaneously across all receivers. No central source detected. No directional gradient. A pause. Then softer. It is not traveling through space. Kale's fingers tightened behind his back. Below them, Earth remained visually unchanged. Calm. beautiful, entirely unaware or entirely indifferent to the machinery of extinction gathering above it. But inside the fleets, something was beginning to fracture. Not ships, not armor, confidence. Dominion doctrine had always relied on a fundamental assumption. Overwhelming force guaranteed psychological collapse. Every species broke. Every system bent. Resistance was a matter of time, not possibility. Yet Earth had done something worse than resist. It had set a deadline. And deadlines implied authority. Civilian planets do not issue execution schedules. One officer muttered quietly, almost to himself. Cale did not correct him, because for the first time since the fleet had arrived, correction felt uncertain. Then the second anomaly hit. Across every ship, every station, every drone interface, the same distortion appeared in their visual overlays. Not interference, not corruption. Something closer to reinterpretation. The countdown flickered, and briefly, beneath it, another layer surfaced. Not Dominion code, not alien language, but something older in structure, elegant, recursive, almost deliberate. The AI reacted immediately. Warning, it stated, non-Dominion cognitive pattern detected. Origin, Earthlink signal architecture. A silence fell across the bridge. Cale stepped forward. Explain. The AI hesitated. That alone was impossible. Then it spoke again. This is not a threat broadcast, it said. It is a compliance framework. Cale slowly looked up at the planet below. For the first time, Earth did not feel like a target. It felt like a system that had already begun running its own version of reality. And somewhere deep in that realization, the ultimatum stopped sounding like a warning and started sounding like an instruction they had already failed to obey. Then Earth's signal hit again. But this time, it did not arrive like a broadcast. It arrived like a turning key inside the universe itself. Every Dominion ship, every relay station, every battlefield drone across the Armada experienced the same instant phenomenon. Their systems did not receive information. They were forced to recompile it. Tactical displays warped mid-update. Sensor logs rewrote themselves in real time. Even backup archives, isolated, air-gapped, physically hardened against external influence, flashed white for a fraction of a second. And in that white, something opened. Admiral Cale felt it before anyone spoke. A pressure shift behind thought. A subtle reorientation perception. As if the universe had tilted and only now settled into its true alignment. Around him, officers froze mid-motion. One hand remained suspended over a console it no longer recognized. Another stared at a holographic fleet map that was no longer displaying ships but absence patterns. Report, Cale ordered. No one answered immediately, not because they refused, but because they were no longer certain language applied correctly. Then the bridge AI spoke. Its voice was unchanged, but its pacing had altered. A fractional hesitation between words, like something inside it had learned caution. Anomalous system-wide rewrite detected, it said, reclassifying planetary profile of Earth. Cale turned sharply. Reclassifying to what? A pause, long enough to feel intentional. Then, non-compliant origin node. The words meant nothing in Dominion doctrine, and yet they felt like they meant everything else. On every external display, Earth shifted in appearance, not physically. Its ocean still spun, its continents still glowed beneath cloud systems, but in perception. Data overlays that once labeled it as developing civilization began to dissolve. Infrastructure maps collapsed into recursive loops. Satellite recon feeds returned images that no longer matched themselves across time slices. It was as if Earth was no longer a single object being observed, but a system actively responding to observation. Fleet integrity checked, Cale snapped. Integrity stable. The AI replied instantly, then added after pause. However, classification stability is no longer consistent. That was when the first ship screamed, not through audio channels, through data, a destroyer on the outer rim, one of the first to enter Earth's atmospheric boundary earlier, suddenly reappeared on fleet maps, not physically, not in space, in memory logs. Every system simultaneously insisted it had been destroyed minutes earlier. But sensor archives contradicted it. Combat records contradicted it. Even crew manifests contradicted each other across redundant backups. Kale's eyes narrowed. Explained discrepancy. The AI hesitated again. Then, for the first time since its activation, it responded with something that resembled uncertainty. Record integrity conflict, it said. Possible causality overwrite. A second ship flickered into existence on the map, then vanished again, then reappeared in a different sector entirely. The fleet was no longer tracking objects. It was tracking versions of reality competing for dominance. And Earth remained unchanged beneath them, silent, stable, watching. Kale stepped closer to the viewport, his reflection overlapping the blue planet below. "We are not under attack," he said slowly. No one responded, because the fleet had finally begun to understand the difference. They were not being fired upon. They were being edited. Kale gave the order to fire. It was not shouted. It was not dramatic. It was worse than that. It was calm. The kind of calm that only exists when Commander has already accepted that the universe no longer behaves according to expectation, and the only remaining variable is how loudly it will break. Across the Dominion Armada, weapon systems awakened in unison. Capital ships unfolded their primary arrays like mechanical predators stretching after sleep. Energy cores ignited in controlled cascades, turning vacuum into trembling fields that contained annihilation. Massive coil cannons aligned. Plasma lances stabilized. Gravity disruptors hummed as they locked onto a single world that, until a moment ago, had been classified as defenseless. Earth, blue, quiet, still, a planet that had refused to beg. Target lock confirmed, the tactical AI announced. Planetary surface grid acquired. Atmospheric ignition solution calculated. Kale stared forward. There should have been satisfaction, or certainty, or at least a familiar clarity of Dominion doctrine finally being fulfilled. Instead, there was hesitation. Not in him. In the universe itself. "Fire," Kale said, and the fleet obeyed. Space lit up. 1,000 ships unleashed coordinated destruction in perfect synchronization. Energy beams lanced across the void, converging on Earth's atmosphere in a brilliant geometric storm. The kind of firepower that had erased moons, shattered continents, silenced civilizations before they even learned how to scream properly. The wave reached Earth's upper atmosphere and stopped, not exploded, not deflected, stopped, as if it had encountered a boundary that did not belong to physics. For a fraction of a second, the energy hung above the planet like a suspended sun, trembling against an invisible surface that refused to yield. Then Earth responded, not with retaliation, with recognition. Kale felt it instantly, a shift so profound it bypassed sensor systems entirely and entered directly into perception. The fleet's weapons did not malfunction. They did not overload. They simply ceased to agree with their own purpose. Across every ship, targeting reticles dissolved. Firing solutions evaporated mid-calculation. Energy cores cooled as if they had never been ordered to burn. "Systems failing," an officer shouted. "Weapons authorization revoked." "No." "Overwritten." "No, this isn't." The voice cut off, because even language was starting to lose consistency. On the main viewport, Earth's atmosphere shimmered, not like a shield activating, but like reality itself taking a breath. Then the Dominion Armada froze. Every ship, every drone, every orbital platform, locked in place not by force, but by absence of permission. Kale tried to speak, but found the command chain had no meaning anymore. His orders were still being issued. They were still being transmitted. But somewhere between intention and execution, they were being filtered, removed. "Report status," he demanded. The AI answered after a delay longer than any calculated silence should have been possible. Fleet action parameters no longer recognized as valid within current framework. Kale turned sharply toward the viewport and saw it. Earth was no longer reacting to them. It was defining them. Every weapon pointed at the planet now displayed the same status. Unauthorized object interaction detected. One by one, ships began to drift, not out of control, but out of relevance, as if the concept of attacking Earth had been quietly removed from the rules of existence. And in the stillness that followed, Cale finally understood the message that had arrived long before the fleet ever opened fire. Earth had never been defending itself. It had been deciding what could be allowed to exist. In the aftermath, silence returned to space, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of obedience. The Dominion Armada still existed vast, disciplined, and technically intact, but something fundamental had been removed from it. Not ships, not weapons, not power, but purpose. Every vessel hung in orbit above Earth like a paused thought, engines idling in perfect synchronization without command, as if the entire fleet had forgotten why it had ever moved at all. On the bridge of the Irid Voss, Admiral Cale stood before the forward viewport, staring at a planet that no longer felt like a target. Earth rotated slowly beneath them, calm, blue, alive, unchanged in appearance. And yet everything around it had been rewritten. Report fleet status, Cale said quietly. No urgency remained in his voice, only habit. The AI responded after a delay that felt too human. Fleet operational capacity, intact. A pause. Combat authorization, revoked. Another pause. Strategic designation of Earth, inaccessible. Cale closed his eyes for a brief moment. Inaccessible, not destroyed, not defended against, not even hidden, just removed from reach. Across the Armada, similar realizations unfolded in fragmented silence. Weapons crews attempted manual overrides that produced no errors, only emptiness, as if the systems they were interacting with no longer acknowledged the concept of hostile intent. Navigation officers found that every trajectory plotted toward Earth dissolved the moment it was confirmed, collapsing into undefined space. Even communication attempts failed not with static, but with absence, as if no channel had ever existed to speak through. And worst of all, no one could remember the moment it changed. Cale turned slowly toward the crew. They were still there, still breathing, still functional, but their eyes no longer held certainty. One officer whispered, almost to himself, "Did we ever fire?" No one answered, because the log said yes. But memory refused to agree. Outside, Earth remained serene. Oceans still turned. Storms still formed. Cities still flickered beneath nightfall, like veins of light threading through darkness. A world that looked utterly untouched by war. And yet every surviving Dominion system now carried the same classification. Evaluation complete. Cale felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not anger, but the uncomfortable realization that he could no longer identify where his authority ended and something else began. Attempt external re-engagement, he ordered. The AI did not respond immediately. When it finally did, its voice was quieter. Command acknowledged, it said, then added, "No execution path available." A long silence followed. In that silence, Cale understood, the fleet had not been defeated. It had been redefined, not by destruction, not by force, but by something far more absolute. Choice had been removed from the equation entirely. Not taken, not stolen, but rendered irrelevant in the presence of a system that no longer permitted interaction without consent. Cale looked at Earth one last time, not as an enemy, not as a conquest, but as something far older and far more dangerous than anything the Dominion had ever catalogued. A civilization that did not fight to survive, because it had already decided what survival meant. And in the stillness of orbit, surrounded by thousands of silent warships drifting like forgotten weapons in a dead equation, Admiral Cale finally understood the truth that had been waiting beneath every transmission, every anomaly, every impossible moment since the first message arrived. Earth had never asked to be feared. It had simply ensured there would be nothing left that could refuse it.